For me, Arshavin really is probably the definition of a cult hero.
It really is the sort of quintessential example of a deadline day deal. You couldn't make it up, really.
It was the Euro 2008. Boy, what a player, and what a player you'd want to have for your team. He just had this style of play where he caused a bit of havoc. He seemed to be able to beat players really easily. He had an intelligence about him. He'd come alive in those attacking areas. It was the quarterfinals against Holland, and then he went and scored. He was in the team of the tournament in the Euros. He stood out, and I think everyone wanted to sign him.
I was aware that he was somebody that Arsenal were looking at for a long time. The Arsene Wenger had this ability to still be able to pluck players out of obscurity, and although it was a diminishing ability of his as the time went on at Arsenal, at that stage he still had that. I was sort of aware of the name before the player in that case. Unpredictable, mercurial, could change games, and really had the potential at that point to take the Premier League by storm.
That was the era of Arsene Wenger. It was more about setting us up for the next 100 years with this stadium and all of the infrastructure and everything you see around Arsenal today. We were a team littered with brilliant talent, and then also some real mediocrity. Van Persie, Fabregas, Nasri, Rosicki, and then Silvestre, Giroud, Amari Bischoff. There was so much promise and just not enough trophies to go with it.
They were paying down the debt on the stadium move. They were losing a lot of players at the time to Manchester City primarily, but you look back at Arsenal during that period and there was a fragility about them that meant that their more creative players didn't have the stability within the team to be able to go and produce their best.
Arsenal were a very sensible club. We didn't really ever go and get the style that everyone's after. That wasn't a very Arsenal thing to do in those times, and back in those days we were a selling club, so I didn't think it'd happen at all.
Dennis Lackter, who was Arshavin's agent at the time, an interesting character, temperamental, wouldn't return calls, but then wouldn't stop ringing you on some days. How that deal came about actually was his cousin was playing in a Maccabi football league in London with Phil Smith, who was the brother of John Smith, and both of them were agents. They ran an agency called First Artists. And Phil got to know Dennis's cousin through that, and through that acquaintance he got to know Dennis, and that's how the conversation started about Arshavin wanting to come to England, and specifically whether he wanted to come to Arsenal. When it looked like things were going south with Arsenal, he had another club in mind. A couple of weeks before the end of the window, they were sort of £5 million apart. At that point, as a journalist, I was covering the story quite closely because I knew Phil and John. I'd known them for a while. It was a transfer that was mooted throughout that January. The deal edged forward because Arsenal kept incrementally improving their offer. Zenit stuck to 15 million. Arsenal started at 8, they went to 10, they went to 12, it went to 13. They tried everything, but Zenit were just not going to budge from that 15 and Arsenal were refusing to pay it. It got to 13.8 on deadline day. It was never close until the final 48 hours, and really the final sort of 4 minutes it was about the moment where it got done. So it really is the sort of quintessential example of a deadline day deal, because it didn't look like it was going to get over the line until right at the end. At that point, there was a snowstorm in London and it was forecast to get really, really bad. There'd been a lot of talk about whether they were going to extend deadline day. Seeing this was coming, they flew Arshavin to London thinking, right, we need to get him in the country. But John and Phil took a punt really, and they decided, look, we're not going to let this deal collapse. So they flew him on a private jet to Stansted. John and Phil said to him, look, just keep a low profile. He'll go to bed the next morning. Front page of virtually every paper is Andrey Arshavin pictured with a bobble hat on his mobile phone outside the hotel where they put him. Can't believe it. So of course all hell breaks loose at this point. Zenit are on the phone saying, why is he there? There's no deal. About midway point in February the 1st, the FA and the Premier League confirmed that the deadline is going to be pushed back to February the 2nd. But the negotiations continue and nothing else is resolved. Nothing moves overnight. So we get to February the 2nd.
I just remember on that deadline day just not knowing what was going to happen. Really, really frustrating because you so desperately want it to happen. But often Arsenal surprise you. The way we signed Bergkamp, the way we signed Sol Campbell. And with this one, it was very tantalising, but you just didn't know whether it was going to be a good surprise or a bad surprise.
At 3 o'clock, They say they're going to have one final meeting in Russia to determine what they're going to do about Andrey. Nothing's going to change. It's 15 million, but we will sell him for 15 million. So they've only got 2 hours. The final sort of half an hour of the window, John picks up the phone. Right, you've got your 15 million. I'm going to pay the 1.2. He put his own money up. The money was his, it came from his own pocket. I mean, he's an Arsenal fan as well, by the way. It wasn't going to bankrupt him, but it was a sort of huge amount of money to him. Zenit then starts sending the paperwork to Arsenal saying Arsenal have agreed to pay £15 million. Now, Ivan Gazidis phones John and says, how much have you cost me? And John said, well, somebody had to do something. We had to get this deal over the line. You want the player wants to come. Zenit really want to sell. You know, everything's in place. And there's a long pause on the end of the phone, and Ivan just says, okay. If he'd not put the money up, that deal wouldn't have happened. Even though this is 2009, you'd think an email would be good enough, but no, they wanted a fax. It had to be a fax. Of course, the Russians' fax machine breaks down. You couldn't make it up, really.
It was a sort of days where people were talking about fax machines, you know, but that was the charm of transfer dealings back then.
At that point, no one really knows what is actually proof in terms of the Premier League sort of threshold. On the final minutes of the window, John tells the story where he's got Jim White saying this deal is done. He's got Big Ben basically about to chime in the background. No one can seem to actually just get the right documentation together, or no one's fax machine can work. Just send an email that says agreed. And with 4 seconds left before the deadline, that email came through.
I thought it'd be sensational.
That deal was a huge moment for Arsenal, really. For a long time, he was their club record signing. He didn't live up to that expectation.
He just didn't really seem to do the dirty side of the game.
Ultimately, he wasn't able to rise above that wider malaise about this sort of imbalance that Arsenal had in their team. It was inconsistency, was his undoing, really. He was a bit of a misfit, I think, in that team, but he never really got to play in his preferred position, I don't think. Arshavin's Arsenal career really was about moments.
Absolutely that. The 4 goals at Anfield.
4 shots on target, 4 goals, 4-4 draw. They don't even win the game, which tells you, I think, a wider issue about where Arsenal were at the time.
The winner against Barcelona.
Where they beat them 2-1 at the Emirates. Unbelievable noise. He had that capability.
He has a T-shirt of his token celebration in the event that he goes and scores the winner. It was that made us love him so much. He was such a quirky little bloke.
I think he's remembered fondly because he was a good character, and people remember those moments.
You can't help but smile when you look back on his time, and am I glad that Arsenal signed him? Am I glad that he's part of the history of this club? 100% yes.
I suppose he fits the cult hero criteria because he had quite a few, but not enough, 10 out of 10 games. But you know, some people like that. They're quite happy to sign up to go and watch 10 games because you know that 1 or 2 of those are going to be unforgettable.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube, and for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN+.